Tom, great to connect. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Nate. Pleasure to be here.
The question I ask is similar for everyone. You know, could you share an experience you've had where you learned something that you most want to pass on to others? You've had quite the experience, and I look forward to hearing the lesson you learned from this experience and what you most want to pass on.
Yeah, I'm Tom Hardin. About 15 years ago, I was a major informant in the largest insider trading investigation of a generation. So I always say you don't volunteer to cooperate with the FBI. You do have to be charged with insider trading, which I was, and I'm here to talk about today. And I never had any plans to share this story until the FBI invited me to speak about it. So today, my goal is to share some hard lessons from my younger career, just with the world and how do we think about psychology, decision making, rationalization. And so, just a very long story short, I started working in the hedge fund industry at a college in the early 2000s, covering tech stocks. And at that time, I loved the markets. I loved investing. You were compensated on your stock pick. So if you picked great stocks, you were compensated well. If you didn't, you were fired. And I liked a flat meritocratic structure where there was really no politics, and it was very much a scorecard system. But I also kind of became aware in the mid 2000s that people in my industry were trading stocks on inside information. And what I mean by that is the information was not public and it was material. And it got to the point where hedge funds would hire analysts to work for them who had worked at public companies to call back and get this information and trade the stock. So there's a term you'll be familiar with, normalization of deviance in the industry at this time, where looking around, it kind of seemed like everybody was doing it. And I wasn't part of that group as a young professional. I had some major insecurities about not being part of the in group. And I think it led to the decisions that I'll talk about next, but I'm happy to pause there.
Yeah, so interesting. And just a quick reaction, and then you can continue. Having taught business ethics for a number of years, having been a human, being a human,
Yes.
I know how easy it is to commit ethical breaches, to lie, steal, cheat. It's and it's so easy for us on one hand to think I would never do that, while at the same time doing all sorts of things that we wouldn't have predicted we would have
Right.
done. And then when we do them, we rationalize and justify why we did them. So uh, I appreciate the backdrop, and I look forward to hearing how this happened and what happened.
Sure. So at my second and final hedge fund, so now I'm 28 years old. I'm a junior partner at this great hedge fund, a new fund seeded by a legendary Wall Street investor. I was investing with a 3-year horizon in the beginning. My favorite idea back then was to be long Google, to own Google, and to short all the yellow page stocks. And younger listeners won't know what yellow pages are, but I'm sure that you remember those. Those were the bricks in the driveway that were going to
Yeah.
go away
Oh yeah.
with Google. So that's the only insight you have to have in this business. One insight can make your career. And so we were investing with a 3-year horizon. We lost money in the first quarter. My boss came into my office, closed the door, and said, "Look, we lost money in the first quarter. Now our goals are to make money every month." So just to step there back there, the goal went from 3 years to make money every month.
Mm.
And as the junior professional, Nate, I didn't ask any clarifying questions about what he meant. He was aware that people were insider trading in the industry. Our competition was cheating to get ahead. And I didn't ask him, are we going to stay within the legal or ethical guardrails? I just assumed anything goes. If I got this information, I might be tempted to place a trade to help us. So I would say there was major ambiguity in his message to me to do what it takes. And again, me not clarifying that at all plays a huge part in what happens next. And over the next couple of weeks, I received a call from another investor who told me I had made her a lot of money over the last few years on my great stock ideas every year. And she had something for me very specific. It was a blatant tip. She heard that a private equity company was going to buy a public company in a few weeks. Here's the date. Here's the price. Here's the private equity firm. This is a person who was always full of rumors, but this sounds much different than a rumor. It sounds like exact information. I didn't make any trades that day because it was so jarring. It was so specific. It sounded illegal. But later that day, I was talking to a friend. We were catching up. He's a trader also. He's losing money that month. We're talking. He said, "Are you hearing anything out there I could take a flyer on, like a short-term trade?" I said, "Hey, I'm not trading this, but this woman just called me, told me this information. If you want to do it, you're free to do it." I'm giving him a gift of information, but right there, I've actually broken pretty much every insider trading law by tipping, and I haven't even traded yet.
Hmm.
And he tells his whole firm, they load up every day. The stock is going up a little bit on this information I gave him. The woman that called me has her entire brokerage account in this stock for this event. I had not made any trades yet, but about a week goes by. He calls me back and he said, "Dude, did you buy some?" And when a person commits fraud, there's something called a fraud triangle. There's a need to do it. So the perceived need was short-term performance. Then there's the opportunity. The opportunity at my company was I could buy a stock in our portfolio and not have to talk to the boss as long as it was less than 1% of the assets we manage for clients, a small position. I bought a 0.9% position. And the third part of the fraud triangle is rationalization, which we just talked about. It seems like everybody's doing it. I'll do it just this one time, just once. I still thought of myself as a good guy. There's this idea of moral licensing where I'm a faithful husband. I go to church. I do all these good things in life. I make thousands of trades. I'll just make this one trade. It's really meaningless. It's immaterial. It's so small. And what I'm doing here, kind of a bigger takeaway for people to think about, is I made all these decisions in isolation. So I didn't talk to the boss, didn't talk to anybody else at my company, didn't talk to mentors. My boss was my mentor, didn't talk to anybody, made that decision on my own to cross that line. And a few weeks later, the deal happens exactly as she says. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to get fired by my boss. He's going to know this is illegal. I talked to him that morning. We go through our portfolio and he says, "Oh my gosh, it's one of those, Tom. Don't tell me how you're doing it." So he's being willfully blind to my trade. It would happen three more times, 0.9% positions. I'd place the trades. My boss looking the other way. And he's my mentor. He's not asking me questions. This goes on. At the end of 2007, there was four trades. The firm made $1 million. We managed $100 million for clients. So that added 1% of performance. Of the $1 million, my personal take at 29 years old, price of my career was $46,000. And then a few months later, my life was totally upended, but I'm happy to pause there and fill in any blanks.
Yeah, so many interesting points and lessons there. And the first one that jumps out to me is the goal. The goal moving from the long-term horizon, 3 years, to the 1 month. And what we know about goals is they motivate performance. Countless studies on how goal setting improves performance, but goal setting also, when not used appropriately, leads to unethical behavior because
That's right.
we're willing to cut corners. I think it's so interesting how that goal contributed to you cutting corners, committing the fraud. And in the moment when you placed that first trade, you knew it was insider trading, but it's a small trade. Your buddy's doing it. Stock's going up. Do you remember how you were feeling in that moment?
Um, in the moment, I felt, you know, kind of mixed emotions. Like, okay, this is illegal. Like, I want to be clear. I knew this was illegal, but it seems like everybody's doing it. Um, and when I placed the trade, I was telling myself, maybe this is a rumor. This isn't actually something real. She could be full of it. And then a few weeks goes by and it actually happens. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this is actually real. This isn't good. My heart's pounding. And then when my boss kind of waves it off and doesn't ask any questions about it and saying basically, don't tell me how you're doing this, then I hate to say it, I had an adrenaline rush because I was now part of the group, the illicit in group.
Yeah.
So in my 20s, I think I was very insecure about not being part of that illicit group in this business or who I thought was the in group. And then once I got the tip in the trade, the next conference I went to, they could have put their arms around me and said, "Now you're one of us." So I was very insecure about not having that status. I think as a young man, as a young professional.
Really interesting how feeling that sanction, feeling that support from your supervisor gives you an adrenaline rush, and now it's turned into something to crave and do more of. And then the other thing that you mentioned I thought was really interesting and is something I talk about is this moral licensing idea. We're not bad people, right? I mean, we do good things. We love our spouse. We take care of our kids. Like you said, we go to church. Whatever we do that makes us feel like we're a good person, it's easy for us when we do all those good things to then say like, it's okay on this other thing. I can do this other thing because I am a good person. So that's interesting to hear you describe that.
Yeah, in my whole life to a smaller scale. I mean, going back when I was in high school, I got my driver's license. I would always speed a little bit, not to get pulled over. When I was in college, there was something called Napster, so that came out, downloaded a few songs every week. So all through my life, I'm able to tell myself it's okay to cross these lines. And by
Mhm.
29, it was the big one with the insider trading. So about 7 months after the fourth trade, my boss kind of saying this is okay. I was dropping off my dry cleaning in July of 2008 in New York City, stepped on the sidewalk to get a taxi, and a guy behind me said, "Are you Thomas Covey Hardin?" My full name on a Manhattan sidewalk. The last time I heard that, it was my mother in Georgia when she was going to whip my butt, but it wasn't
Right.
her. And I turned around, two FBI agents. They sat me down. They said they knew I was down in Georgia the previous weekend visiting my baby nephew for his baptism, and they knew his name. And they said, "We think you can clean up the industry for us." And I took their card and I said, "Should I talk to a lawyer?" And the FBI said, "We'll let you know when you can do that." So I didn't talk to a lawyer
Wow.
for 2 years. They had me wear a body wire on major people in the industry, build relationships with people. The way I thought about this was I better start making good decisions now and help them clean up the industry. And so I went after people who I felt were the worst actors, but it wasn't easy getting people in conversations face to face for information that might take away their liberties, their personal liberties. And I didn't really think this was going anywhere. The FBI never really gave me feedback until one day in 2009, the agent called me and said, "Turn on CNBC. 20 people were in handcuffs. The
Wow.
perp walks, the FBI windbreakers, the news cameras happened to be there." And in the Wall Street Journal, the person in the middle of all these people arrested, they were calling Tipper X. And I called the FBI and said, "Am I Tipper X?" And the FBI said, "You are, and you should probably talk to a lawyer now."
Oh my gosh, what a ride.
Yeah.
Okay, so going back a little bit, you decide to cooperate. First time you put on a wire, what's that feeling like?
Oh, my shirt is drenched. I'm walking into a Starbucks, and the crazy thing with me is I'm helping them build cases against people I don't know that well. And usually, if you have to wear a wire, you're in a terrible situation. Like when I roll over on a friend or somebody. And so this was people I was bringing them. Maybe I'll build relationships. And so I'm sitting down. I'm trying to get to the point so fast with the target. "Hey, nice to see you. I'm Tom. Remember 3 years ago when you traded on inside information? What would you say if you ever asked about that?" They would change the subject. The FBI would listen to it later and say, "Tom, you're doing a terrible job." And I'd say, "Hey, it's my first time doing this. There was no training for this. I had no training." One piece of advice the FBI gave me is a great negotiation tactic where you ask a question and then say nothing. So I would ask the target a question. I would say nothing. The silence would go on forever. And then eventually the target would start to talk about sources they had or the ways they got information, just enough where the FBI said, "Okay, Tom, you're done here. On to the next one."
It's interesting to think about the day-to-day mechanics of wearing a wire. And like you said, there's no class for that. You don't grow up learning how to be an informant. How did you feel in these meetings when you were trying to catch somebody? Is there a part of you that feels guilty for trying to gain somebody's trust and violate it? Or are you mostly just feeling like they're breaking the law, they're behaving unethically, and we've got to catch them and they need to pay their price?
The first part you mentioned, the guilt of trying to trip these people up in conversations, it started that way. But then I got to a point in my mind where, hey, now I'm doing the right thing. Like I made some wrong decisions. Now I'm doing the right thing. The agents always played up to my patriotism. "Tom, you're really helping out your country." And I thought at some point the FBI would hire me to work for them. I was just trying to stay positive in my head. Maybe I'll be like that movie Catch Me If You Can, Frank Abagnale. Maybe
Mm.
I'll be an FBI consultant. or maybe I'll drop the charges. So I was trying to approach it that way, and they were really giving me no feedback as to how I was even doing with these conversations until the day the name Tipper X came out.
I talked to an FBI agent years ago, and I asked him kind of a similar question of, when you catch them and they know, because he's like, you catch them, they lie, 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 and then there's this moment where they realize they're caught. And I was like, how do you feel in that moment? Do you feel sad? Do you feel bad? He's like, no, that's the best moment. And I've thought about that a lot, and I can imagine how over time, I feel like it would take me time to get there. But I think
Yeah,
ultimately it is probably the right reaction. I mean, we do need to hold people accountable for taking advantage of the general public, even though, it can feel like a victimless crime or whatever. If uh, without the FBI, without law enforcement, we live in a society that we don't want to live in. And so
right.
I appreciate that I'm grateful there are people willing to do that. I can imagine how difficult it would be in that moment when you saw everybody getting arrested. What was that like for you?
I at first I feared for my safety. Like, are they going to figure out who Tipper X is? I had told myself for 2 years it doesn't seem like this is going anywhere. They're not giving me feedback, and then people were arrested. And I also felt bad. I mean, for the people, even though I played a big part in
Yeah.
this, just seeing people perp walk like sort of like animals from their apartments, like it just seemed a little bit too gratuitous to be filming this and putting it on TV.
Mm.
So I was upset more, more for how it was displayed, the sort of the pomp and circumstance of it. And eventually, the FBI was trying to get me to wear a wire on two people closer to me, where I drew the line. I just said, these are good men; these are not the bad guys. That's the way I thought about it. And the FBI said, "Okay, we're done with you. Your name's going to come out tomorrow." And it was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Thomas Hardin is Tipper X, and that's a crazy day because only my wife knew about this. I wasn't allowed to tell anybody except for her. So then everybody that knew me saw who I was at that moment. And I lost so many friends, connections. You do figure out who your true friends are. So I did get 4 emails from people or text saying, if you need to talk, if you need to have coffee or a drink, happy to do it. I know who you are. But that was a tough moment thinking I kind of felt like Tipper X might be not known forever, which is silly, but that was one thought I had.
Wow, what an experience, Tom. And so when your name gets publicized in the Wall Street Journal, was that the day that you hire an attorney?
I had hired an attorney a few months before that. And so when I reached out to him, I said, "Hey, I'm Tipper X." And of course, he said, "Who was your attorney before me? It's been 2 years." I said, "You're the first I've spoken to." He said, "Tom, you're supposed to hire me the first day the FBI approached you." I said, "Hey, it's my first time doing this." So there's no college class about when to do this. Maybe we should have an ethics class now, but just nothing about this. If he couldn't believe it, I had just been all in my cooperation for 2 years without legal counsel. And then he said, "Yeah, they're not going to drop the charges. They're not going to hire you. Stop thinking these weird thoughts, Tom. They're not going to hire you as a professional informant. They're going to use you until they can't." And then there's nothing like seeing your name in the front of the Wall Street Journal. And my wife had just been went back to work that week from maternity leave, and it's already an emotional moment for a new mother.
Yeah.
And she comes home. The first, she was so stoic, Nate. She just held it together so well. And 85% of marriages in this situation, she comes home and just loses it, takes the baby from my arms, and says, "I can't believe you did this to us." I'd never felt lower like in my life at that point.
Oh my gosh, I just can't even imagine what that is like, the feelings you were having, the feelings your wife is having. So now it's public, now everybody knows. What do you do?
So she's just said, "Hey, try to be the best stay-at-home dad you can be." I mean, there's no way to work because I have to check the felony box, and there's a major stigma for having committed a crime, of course, and there should be. And so my lawyer said, "You're going to have to start your own company." And I tried drop shipping before it was a thing, and my
Mm.
listings on Amazon were hijacked by my suppliers in China. And I wasn't sentenced for 7 years. It just took forever. I didn't get any prison because I helped the FBI, but I had to keep the felony. And then a year after I was sentenced, the FBI invited me to speak about my experience. And when they called, it's always a restricted number. I thought, oh my God, what do these guys want now? They said of the 80 people they arrested, I was the youngest, and the 46,000 was the least amount of money somebody made. And I said, well, thanks for rubbing it in. I was trying not to get caught. And they said, that's really interesting. How do people rationalize? Otherwise, good people just rationalize these bad decisions. And I spoke at the FBI in New York, and they encouraged me to go out and share the story and the lessons learned. That was about 9 years ago.
I'm grateful you are sharing what you learned, and I'm grateful for you sharing such a personal experience that is something that it's just could only imagine what that's like, or maybe better said, can't even imagine what that's like. So if we were to try to summarize, what lesson do you take away from this that you would most want to pass on to others?
For me, if I could go back to talk to younger Tom, and anybody really, you're the average of the people you surround yourself with, the sort of the five people. I chose in my early career to surround myself with people of questionable character, and that really blew myself up. So really think about who you surround yourself with. I would say watch what success is rewarding. So people always follow the incentives. We mentioned the goals change the very short term. And then there's this idea I have in my book called the integrity gap, which is we think about reputation so much in business. What's our reputation? What other people think of us? And sometimes we neglect our character. Like, what decisions are we actually making? And the further your reputation is from your character is what I call the integrity gap. And that's where those rationalizations can fill the gap. So we want to think about that, I think, in our lives and how can we close that gap.
Great takeaways. And just going back to that first one, we are the people we hang around. One thing we talk about in ethics and one thing we know from the research is that culture drives behavior. If you're in an unethical culture, it can be so difficult to behave ethically because we I came across some research years ago on how our species mimics others to a greater degree than any other species we know of. We copy people. We're professional copycats. It's hardwired into us as little babies. If when you smile at a little baby, they smile back. They're not consciously deciding to do that. It is hardwired into us to mimic and copy people. And if we surround ourselves by people all day who are lax on the rules, who are cutting corners, it's just almost inevitable. That what's there's there's the analogy of um, it was totally unexpected, came out of the clear blue sky, just like a scheduled airliner. It's unexpected until you see it, but if you know the airliner's coming, you know it's going to happen. To
Yeah.
me, that's what this reminds me of is when you're surrounded by unethical people, it's only a matter of kind of when, not if.
Yeah, that's right. And culture is the behavior that employees believe will be rewarded. Every company I speak at has a different definition of culture around the world. And it's not the tone at the top. It's not what's said in the shareholder letters. It's not what's in the code of conduct. It's actually those behaviors, to your point, that are rewarded. And that's what people see.
Well, Tom, thanks again for coming on, sharing your story and your lessons. Any final things you'd like to share as we wrap up here?
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Nate. I'd also say just your scars can become your service. So we all go through crazy things in life. I went through a crazy experience, but they can actually be really used to help people. And that's the idea with what I'm doing today. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Tom. You've inspired me. You've motivated me to try to be better. So I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
Thank you, Nate.
Okay, let's stop.